Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And this is going to be my discussion video for Final Fantasy VII's announcement. So here's the thing. I'm going to come right out and say it from the get-go. This is going to be a relatively short video because I have not immersed myself into the world of Final Fantasy VII just yet. I do not claim to be a big fanatic of Final Fantasy VII because unfortunately, I wasn't around playing the Final Fantasy VII at the time. I did start my journey with Final Fantasy X and I kind of moved forward in the series as opposed to backwards. I didn't explore many of the Final Fantasy games prior to Final Fantasy X until just recently. So we are going to be taking a look at these trailers for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. I will be going through each trailer. Well, there's going to be the two trailers. There's going to be the Final Fantasy VII Part 2, and there'll be Crisis Core, and I will share sort of my initial thoughts, and we'll go from there. So, hope you guys enjoyed today's video.
What we've done, that's set in stone. The past is forever. But the future, even if it has been written, can be changed. So focus on the future, not the past.
I'm just slightly lowering, oh, not slightly, but I'm lowering so I can hear, so that it's not too loud on my ear. Here, let me put this up to HD. Oh, this is HD? Doesn't look like it.
I saw you lying there.
I must say right away, just by looking at, you know, this sequence here, is that it already feels really intense. The music really adds to it. The fact that Sephiroth is walking beside Cloud really adds to the intensity. And the narration actually is really good. So this actually already makes me very excited for the game.
I'm trying so hard to find you.
Sorry. Feel like I failed you.
Okay, so we just watched the official reveal trailer for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Obviously, this has been out already a week before this video comes out. So, you know, most of you, if not all of you, have already probably seen it. I'll be honest, there isn't going to be like too much for me to share because, like I said, I have not played a lot of Final Fantasy VII. I played the remake when it came out for the PS4. That was so much fun. I actually did enjoy the remake so much. I think I may actually have to play it a couple more times to follow the story, just because I really wasn't able to catch too much of the essence of the story of it. Even though Final Fantasy VII Remake really just covers sort of the Midgar saga of Final Fantasy VII. Obviously, as we could see, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth covered the outside of Midgar. So you're looking at the entire world at this point of Final Fantasy VII, which is really cool. Now, of course, just because I haven't played much or immersed myself much into the world of Final Fantasy VII doesn't mean I don't hear about some theories that go on, some, you know, some lore, some Easter eggs about that kind of stuff. I do still remember those, but I think like once I've replayed Remake again, I'm also actually going to play the original Final Fantasy VII. I do have it on PC, so I will be going through that as well. I think I will have a much better understanding of the lore once I play it a couple more times, which I've pretty much considered as going to be a sort of summer homework for me, just so I can start covering Final Fantasy VII on this channel, because I can do as much Final Fantasy X as I want, I can do as much Final Fantasy XII as I want. There is a reason why Cloud is on the banner of this channel. So Final Fantasy VII, I am talking way too fast, is going to be part of the channel. Of course, eventually we're gonna get to all Final Fantasy games, and honestly, I am planning to expand into other universes. I've already mentioned this in other videos, but that's obviously in the long distant future. For now, we will do what's in front of us, which is Final Fantasy VII. There's going to be so much content. I can't wait to take my alternate timeline series into Final Fantasy VII's world. I'm already doing a couple for Final Fantasy X, and I have a couple of things in mind for Final Fantasy XII. Honestly, it's just the storytelling that entices me to play RPG games. I'm very invested in lore. Once I get into a game, you know, there's a lot of, like, I'm very interested also in the gameplay aspects of it. Playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, I enjoyed the combat. It was definitely more action oriented versus the one I've been used to in Final Fantasy X, where it's been turn-based. You know, it's a lot of like strategy, tactical kind of battle, and with Final Fantasy VII, it's very action oriented. You got to be quick on your feet. I also read a couple articles looking into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and there have been definitely comments made especially by the creative director. I want to say his name is Tetsuya Noruma. I don't want to say the names because I don't want to butcher them, and you know, I just don't want to embarrass myself like that. But anyway, so you mentioned that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a game that new players can play if they want to start getting into the world of Final Fantasy VII, which obviously is a place where I fall in that category. Obviously, once I play Final Fantasy VII the original, which I will play before Rebirth comes out, hopefully I will be able to immerse myself into the lore enough. But I'm also interested to see if that stays true for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. That comment reminds me of Final Fantasy X. Actually, I'm going to use it as an example. So Final Fantasy X starts, it's Tidus' story. So it's from his journey from Dream Zanarkand into Spira. But along the way, we learned that Spira actually used to be a lot more technologically advanced. So if Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I'm going to guess, well, not guess, it's going to start at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1. And so, which is why a lot of Rebirth, what we saw was the outside world. It was outside of the city of Midgar, where Cloud and the rest of the party have been pretty much been living in, and they haven't really seen much of the world outside of what they know. So in the retrospect of Final Fantasy X, Spira used to be a lot more advanced, technologically advanced. The only difference is, if Final Fantasy VII Rebirth states, or if the creative director states that you can start the game, you can start your lore journey here at Rebirth and still have an enjoyment of the game. It's stating the fact that they are going to make references to Part 1, so they will be talking about, obviously, Midgar's, where you have to leave Midgar and go into the outside world. You know, that'll kind of lead you to want to play Remake in Part 1 if you are starting your Final Fantasy VII journey at Rebirth, which, you know, I hope I don't fall in the I'm not the only one in that category, but you know, there may be a few of us that haven't started our Final Fantasy VII journeys just yet. And another thing before I go into Crisis Core, which will probably even be a shorter segment, because Crisis Core came out in the PSP in 2007. I've never owned the PSP, I've never played a PSP, I have no idea what to expect with Crisis Core. But I know it serves as a prelude to Final Fantasy VII. So we will take a look at that trailer. But just one thing I want to say before we move on. I am happy that the remake Intergrade actually it's been released on PC. I don't own a PS5, so I wasn't able to play it. But now that it's on PC, I am finally able to play it, record some footage to prepare for her videos, and just enjoy the overall experience. So let's go ahead and go straight into Crisis Core.
Boy, oh boy. The price of freedom is steep.
It always is.
Zach speaking.
Making progress, Zach?
And Geo. I can cut loose, right?
Within reason.
It's showtime.
I love the combat. Like, I am so excited for the combat in both Rebirth and Crisis Core. I mean, Stranger of Paradise has pretty good combat too, actually, I'm not gonna lie.
He went missing during a mission in Wutai.
You know, I've never actually seen you use that. Don't you think it's sort of a waste?
Use brings about wear, tear, and rust, and that's a real waste.
It honestly feels so satisfying when you're able to hit a group of enemies with just one slash of your sword. I think that's something I've always enjoyed about the more action-oriented style of combat. Like hack and slashes, for example, but you know, it's like, I really enjoy it. It's so much fun. You have like one end of the spectrum where it's like turn-based tactical, like for Final Fantasy X and like Dragon Quest, and then you have the more action-based, which is fun on its own end because it's fast-paced.
Heaven?
Not quite. It's a church.
By the way, what is your dream? To become first? Is it?
No, to become a hero.
Ah, good. Unattainable dreams are the best kind.
I love this quote. Like I love the mysterious aura behind the voice behind that quote. It is like amazing.
Protect your honor. As soldier!
You got the iconic Buster sword. Crisis Core reunion. I can't wait for this one too. This is gonna be exciting. Alright, so we just checked out the trailer for Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. So like I stated before we started watching the trailer, that it was released on the PSP for 2007. I never owned a PSP, so I never actually got to play it. But the fact that it talks about events 7 years prior to Final Fantasy VII, so we got to see Zack Fair, who is a fan favorite in the Final Fantasy world, which is really cool. Honestly, just watching the trailer, I already makes me feel really excited. Like the fact that the graphics overhaul is going to make it look really nice and crisp. The animations look really nice. Like I can't wait to immerse myself more into the world of Final Fantasy VII. Crisis Core is coming out this winter, and I think there's a closed beta coming out for it. I hope I manage to get into the closed beta somehow and be able to get an earlier access to it, so I can start, getting earlier access to more content for Final Fantasy VII, because I'm really excited. They announced so much stuff for Final Fantasy VII, which is great. I know there's a couple of stuff for mobile. Like I know Final Fantasy VII, the First Soldier has new content coming out, but I don't play too many mobile games. I'll admit the one main mobile game I play is Dragon Quest Tactics, because that one's a bit more slow paced. It's like one of those games. It's like I don't have to be checked. I do have to check on it every now and then, but just because I'm such a big fan of the Dragon Quest world that collecting monsters from various Dragon Quest games and just leveling them up, there's so much customization and progression on the game that I get hooked. Like that's what gets me wanting to play mobile games. Final Fantasy VII falls more into the battle royale genre, which I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of. I've played a bit of Fortnite, PUBG, but I'm not a big fan of those. Honestly, I'd rather just spend my time reading books like a nerd and coming up and reading up lore like a nerd and manipulating lore like a nerd. Just kidding. But yeah, so again, I'm really excited for when Crisis Core and Rebirth comes out. So until then, I will be playing Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrate on PC. I will be streaming Final Fantasy XIV this Sunday, so the Sunday after this video comes out at 9 a.m. PST. So be sure to join me if you guys want to talk more about Final Fantasy VII or perhaps other games that you guys want to talk lore about while just having a good time and having some fun. I'll be honest, I'll be learning Final Fantasy XIV because I've only maybe logged 10 minutes of gameplay into Final Fantasy XIV before I stop. There is so much to do in that game. I was actually caught whether I should stream Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrate or if I should stream Final Fantasy XIV, but I'm gonna choose Final Fantasy XIV because I'll have plenty of opportunity to showcase Final Fantasy VII content when I start digging into the lore, and it's going to be immersive. So that's going to do for today's video. It ended up being a lot longer than I thought, surprisingly, considering the fact that, again, I am not big into the lore of Final Fantasy VII, just simply because I wasn't really able to play it. I didn't have access to it when I was younger. The first game I ever got to play was Final Fantasy X, and that was because I had to borrow it from my cousin. So I wasn't, like, I happened to stumble upon it by accident, let's just call it that way. But I am rocking the Final Fantasy VII merch from Uniqlo, so I hope to get more merch along the way as well. And hopefully we can move forward and progress. So once again, thank you guys so much for supporting the channel. I am so happy we got to 700 subscribers, even though I need to start posting more often than I am currently. And hopefully this content in the upcoming weeks, months, years is enough for you guys to be entertained, subscribe more, and perhaps help me come up with more new content, and we'll have a fun time. So thank you so much for watching today's video. Please leave a like if you guys enjoyed and subscribe to the channel. Consider subscribing to the channel if you guys want to check out more Final Fantasy and other video game lore content. Other than that, this is Enzo signing out, and I will see you all soon.